The monsoon hammered Seoul's streets like a divine punishment, sheets of water so thick they turned the neon signs of Gangnam into watercolor smears. Nurse Yoon Seoa stumbled through the emergency room's sliding doors at 2:17 a.m., her blue scrubs plastered to her skin and stained with blood that wasn't hers. 14 hours. 14 hours of cardiac arrests, motorcycle accidents, and one elderly stroke patient whose hand had gone cold in hers despite everything she tried. Her legs trembled with exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had tripled, and her vision kept blurring at the edges no matter how many times she blinked. She fumbled for her phone with fingers that barely responded, squinting at the Kakao Taxi app through the curtain of rain pouring from the hospital's overhang. The screen showed a black Mercedes S-Class waiting in the pickup zone. She could just make out its sleek silhouette idling maybe 15 meters away through the downpour. Perfect. All she needed was to collapse into that back seat, close her eyes, and let someone else navigate through this apocalyptic weather while she finally rested. She pulled her thin jacket over her head and ran toward the vehicle, her worn sneakers flooding instantly as she splashed through ankle-deep puddles. The Mercedes was pristine, expensive, with windows tinted so dark they reflected nothing but the storm. She wrenched open the back door and threw herself inside, a small cry of relief escaping as she sank into leather seats that smelled of high-end cologne and something darker, gunpowder. Cigarette smoke. She was too exhausted to process it. She gasped in Korean, her voice hoarse from shouting orders in the ER. Mapogu, the apartment's on. She fumbled in her bag for her wallet, her eyes already closing against the dim interior. The car was far nicer than any taxi she'd ever taken, but Seoul's late-night premium rides were getting fancier. Maybe the driver was trying to justify surge pricing. Maybe she'd accidentally ordered a luxury option. Either way, she didn't care. She just wanted home. The interior was temperature-controlled perfection, warm enough to make her sodden scrubs stop feeling quite so miserable. Soft instrumental music played, something jazzy, sophisticated, definitely not the usual taxi radio. Through her exhaustion, a tiny voice whispered that something was off, but that voice was drowned out by the roar of 14 hours without sitting down, 14 hours of holding lives in her shaking hands. She felt the car shift slightly, someone in the passenger seat, she registered dimly, and without thinking, acting purely on the muscle memory of 1,000 exhausted commutes home, she let herself tip sideways. Her head found a shoulder. Expensive suit fabric, she noticed absently. Broad shoulder. The scent of that cologne stronger now, mixed with something uniquely masculine. Warm. Her last conscious thought, already dissolving into the black relief of sleep, this driver has really nice friends. Then, nothing. Deep, dreamless unconsciousness claimed her in seconds. She didn't notice the way the man whose shoulder she'd commandeered had gone absolutely rigid. Didn't see his hand, which had been reaching for his phone, freeze in midair. Didn't hear the sharp intake of breath from the driver in front, or the way his hand instinctively moved toward the glove compartment where a 9mm handgun waited. Didn't witness the silent exchange of looks between the two men, shock, confusion, the driver's hand on the weapon, waiting for the order. She didn't know that this wasn't her taxi. She didn't know that the shoulder she was drooling on belonged to Chairman Kang Min-ho, one of Seoul's most feared organized crime leaders, a man whose name was whispered with terror from Gangnam to Itaewon, a man who'd killed his first rival at 17 and hadn't stopped since. She didn't know that she should already be dead. ##### Introduction, next 60 seconds. Yoon Seoa represents thousands of medical professionals across Seoul, brilliant, overworked, running on empty while the city's hospitals consume them like fuel. 29 years old, daughter of a factory worker from Busan, the first in her family to earn a university degree. She'd spent the last 6 years giving everything to save lives, working herself into exhaustion so complete that getting into the wrong car seemed like a minor inconvenience rather than a fatal error. To her, Seoul's wealthy elite and its criminal underworld existed in the same category, people from a different planet, irrelevant to her world of 12-hour shifts and instant ramen dinners in a studio apartment she could barely afford. Chairman Kang Min-ho represents something else entirely. The invisible hand that controls everything from Gangnam's glittering nightclubs to Busan's port operations, a man who inherited his father's criminal empire at 23 and built it into something even more formidable. 34 years old, educated at Korea University, fluent in violence and business in equal measure. To most of Seoul, he's a ghost story, whispered about but never confronted, powerful enough that even police captains know not to look too closely at his operations. He'd been returning from a meeting with his underbosses, discussing how to eliminate a rival faction, when an exhausted nurse mistook his car for her ride home. Their worlds existed in parallel lines, never meant to intersect. The healer and the killer. The woman who stayed awake for 14 hours trying to restart a heart, and the man who'd ordered hearts stopped with a single phone call. But on one rain-soaked night in Seoul's neon darkness, exhaustion and coincidence shattered that boundary. This is the story of what happened when Kang's instinct to eliminate threats failed him. When his bodyguard Minji's hand hovered over his weapon, waiting for the signal that never came. When instead of dragging this stranger from his car and teaching her the cost of such disrespect, Chairman Kang found himself staring at blood-stained scrubs and a hospital ID badge, at dark circles under closed eyes and fingers that twitched even in sleep, still trying to save lives even in her dreams. This is the story of the 47 minutes he drove aimlessly through Seoul's flooded streets with a stranger sleeping against his shoulder, wondering why he couldn't give the order to wake her, to terrify her, to make her understand the magnitude of her mistake. The story of how he carried her to her apartment door himself, this woman who weighed nothing and trusted everything, and left her there with only a cryptic warning on expensive paper. This is the story of why, 5 days later, he returned. Why his black Mercedes appeared outside Gangnam Medical Center again, and why when Nurse Yoon Seo-ah got in this time, wide awake, knowing exactly whose car it was, every survival instinct screaming at her to run, she stayed anyway. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a monster is treat him like he's human. And sometimes the most dangerous thing a monster can do is remember that he once was. In Seoul's glittering darkness, where rain washes away blood but never guilt, a wrong turn would change 2 lives forever. This is that story. This is how love begins in the wrong car, with the wrong man, at exactly the wrong time, and somehow becomes the only right thing in both their broken worlds. The cardiac arrest patient had been 23 years old. Yoon Seo-ah's hands were still shaking from the compressions, 30 minutes of them, her palms slamming against a sternum that refused to yield a heartbeat, ribs cracking under her weight like kindling. The monitor's flat line had screamed its monotone accusation while she'd shocked him once, twice, 5 times, the paddles leaving burn marks on skin that was already cooling. Dr. Park had finally called it at 1:47 a.m., his hand on her shoulder the only thing that stopped her from starting compressions again. 23. Motorcycle versus delivery truck. The truck had won. She'd moved mechanically after that, stripping off blood-soaked gloves, updating charts she could barely read through vision that kept swimming out of focus. There'd been other cases, a middle-aged woman's stroke, the clot-busting drugs administered just minutes too late to prevent the drooping paralysis that would haunt her face forever. An elderly man's heart attack, this one they'd saved, his grateful family bowing so deeply she'd wanted to scream that she'd failed someone else's son just 2 hours earlier. 14 hours. Her shift had started yesterday when it was still daylight, when she'd had the energy to smile at patients, to remember their names, to be the kind of nurse her professors had trained her to be. Now her scrubs were a Jackson Pollock of bodily fluids, arterial spray across her left shoulder, betadine stains like rust on her sleeves, something she didn't want to identify crusted on her collar. Her feet felt like they belonged to someone else, swollen and screaming inside sneakers that squelched with every step. Her back had given up sending specific pain signals and settled into a general roar of protest. The ER's automatic doors hissed open, and Seoul's summer monsoon hit her like a physical assault. Water sheeted down so thick it turned the hospital's parking lot into a churning river, the kind of rain that made you question whether the sky had simply given up and decided to become ocean. Lightning cracked overhead, close enough that she felt it in her chest, and thunder followed 3 seconds later with a boom that rattled her bones. She fumbled for her phone with fingers that barely responded to neural commands, squinting at the screen's brightness through the curtain of water pouring from the hospital's overhang. Kakao Taxi showed a black Mercedes S-Class, license plate 374892, waiting in the premium pickup zone. Through the deluge, she could just make out its dark silhouette maybe 15 meters away, headlights diffused into watercolor smears by the rain. Seoa didn't think. Thinking required energy she'd spent 12 hours ago. She pulled her thin jacket over her head and ran. Water invaded her sneakers instantly, flooding through worn mesh, soaking her socks, her feet sliding with every step. The Mercedes materialized from the storm like a sleek predator, all dark glass and chrome, windows tinted black as Seoul's Han River at midnight. She grabbed the door handle, warm, expensive, the kind of metal that cost more than her monthly rent, and wrenched it open. Heat and leather scent enveloped her like an embrace. She threw herself inside with a gasp that was half sob, collapsing into seats so soft they felt like they were trying to absorb her entirely. The door closed with a sound like a bank vault ceiling, cutting off the rain's roar to a distant whisper. She managed in Korean, her voice raw from shouting medical orders all night. Mapogu, the apartment's on, the address dissolved in her throat. God, she was so tired. The interior smelled wrong for a taxi, too expensive, sandalwood and something darker, masculine, not the usual cigarette smoke and air freshener. Soft jazz played through speakers she couldn't see, something sophisticated that didn't match any taxi radio she'd ever heard. A small voice whispered warnings she was too exhausted to hear. The leather was too soft. The temperature too perfect. That scent too intoxicating. She felt warmth radiating from her right, someone in the passenger seat, she registered dimly, and her body made the decision her conscious mind was too tired to question. She let herself tip sideways, her head finding a shoulder that was broad, solid, covered in fabric that felt like it cost more than her nursing degree. The cologne was stronger here, mixed with body heat and something uniquely male that made her hindbrain purr with irrational contentment. Sleep took her like drowning. One moment conscious, the next gone, dropping into blackness so complete it felt like mercy. She didn't see the man whose shoulder she'd claimed go absolutely rigid. Chairman Kang Min-ho had been reaching for his phone to confirm the Choi faction's warehouse locations when the car door opened and chaos invaded. A woman. Soaking wet, gasping, throwing herself into his sanctuary with the kind of desperate relief that suggested she had no idea whose space she'd violated. His hand froze mid-reach. His entire body went still with the predatory calm he'd cultivated since he was 17, the stillness that came before violence. In the driver's seat, Minji's hand moved to the glove compartment where the 9mm waited. The subtle click of the compartment opening was deafening in the sudden silence. But the woman was still talking, words slurring with exhaustion, giving an address in Mapogu like this was normal, like she belonged here. And then she had the audacity to collapse against him, her damp hair brushing his jaw, her full weight settling onto his shoulder like he was furniture, like he was safe, like he was someone who wouldn't snap her neck for such presumption. Kang's breath caught. Up close, he could see the hospital ID badge hanging from her soaked scrubs, Yoon Seoa, RN, Gangnam Medical Center, Emergency Department. The scrubs themselves told stories in blood and worse, arterial spray patterns he recognized from rooms he'd been in, betadine stains, the universal language of medical violence. Her hands were red and raw, the kind of damage that came from washing them 100 times in harsh hospital soap. Dark circles shadowed eyes that had closed the instant her head found his shoulder. She was asleep. Actually asleep. On him. On Chairman Kang Min-ho, whose name made grown men stammer and look away. Chairman Nim. Minji's voice was barely a whisper, his hand still on the gun. The unspoken question hung in the air, what do you want me to do? Kang raised his other hand, stop. Don't touch her. Minji's expression would have been comical in any other circumstance. Confusion, disbelief, a flash of concern that his boss had lost his mind. The gun disappeared back into the glove compartment with a soft click. Drive, Kang said quietly. Anywhere. For 47 minutes, Min Jae drove aimlessly through Seoul's flooded streets while Kang sat frozen, a stranger sleeping against him, trying to understand his own inaction. He should wake her. Should let her see the kind of man whose car she'd invaded, whose shoulder she was drooling on. Should teach her that mistakes like this had consequences that echoed in shallow graves outside the city. Instead, he watched her. The way her fingers twitched even in sleep, like they were still performing CPR, still trying to save someone. The medical terms she muttered, epinephrine, clear, no pulse, fragments of the battle she'd been fighting all night. The complete vulnerability of her sleeping face, trust given to a stranger who deserved none of it. Her hospital ID had fallen to the floor. He picked it up carefully, reading the address on the back, Building 3, Unit 407, Mapogu. A cheap neighborhood. Student housing and struggling professionals. Take us there, he told Min Jae, giving the address. Slowly. When they arrived, she still didn't wake. Not when the car stopped. Not when he shifted carefully, testing. Not even when he gathered her into his arms. She weighed nothing, this woman who fought death for a living, and carried her up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. He set her down outside Unit 407, propping her against the door with a gentleness that felt foreign to hands that had killed. From his jacket pocket, he took out the notebook he used for orders his underbosses would carry out, orders that usually involved broken bones or worse. On the expensive paper, he wrote in precise Korean. Check carefully. Next time you might not survive. He tucked the note into her hand, her fingers closing reflexively around it, and walked away. In the car, Min Jae stared at him. Chairman Nim, why did you? I don't know, Kang said, and the honest answer tasted strange in his mouth. He looked at his shoulder where her head had rested, at the damp spot her wet hair had left, at the place where a stranger had trusted him completely. I don't know. Seoa woke with her cheek pressed against something hard and cold, her neck screaming protest, her mouth tasting like something had died in it. For a confused moment she thought she'd passed out in the hospital break room again, but the surface was wrong, textured, rough. Not linoleum. Not a cot. Her apartment door. She was slumped against her apartment door. She pushed herself upright with a groan, every muscle in her body filing formal complaints. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the hallway's grimy window. 4:30 a.m., according to her phone. She'd lost over 2 hours somewhere between the hospital and here, a black hole in her memory that sent ice crawling down her spine. Something crinkled in her hand. Paper. Expensive paper, the kind that had weight and texture, cream-colored and watermarked with a subtle pattern she couldn't quite make out in the dim light. The handwriting was precise, masculine, written in formal Korean that made her stomach drop. Check carefully. Next time you might not survive. The memory hit her in fragments. Rain. A car that was too nice. Leather seats and cologne. Falling asleep against, oh God. Against someone. A man whose shoulder had been solid and warm and very, very real. Wrong car. She'd gotten into the wrong car. Her hands started shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with 14-hour shifts. She fumbled her keys from her bag, nearly dropped them twice, finally got her door open and stumbled inside. Her studio apartment was exactly as she'd left it, unmade bed, instant ramen containers in the sink, medical textbooks scattered across the tiny table. Safe. Familiar. Normal. But her scrub still smelled like that cologne. Sandalwood and something darker, something expensive and masculine that didn't belong in her world of antiseptic and overcooked cafeteria food. She stripped them off with trembling fingers, threw them in the hamper, stood under her shower's weak spray until the water ran cold. The note sat on her bathroom counter, accusing her with its expensive paper and ominous warning. Someone powerful. Someone dangerous. Someone who could have hurt her, killed her, made her disappear into Seoul's darker corners where nurses from Busan didn't matter to anyone. But he hadn't. He'd carried her home instead. She remembered now, not the carrying itself, but waking briefly in strong arms, the feeling of being held carefully, almost gently, before sleep dragged her back under. Why would someone dangerous enough to write that note be gentle enough to carry an unconscious stranger up 3 flights of stairs? She should tell someone. Should file a police report, tell Dr. Park, call her brother Junho in Busan and confess this insane thing that had happened. But what would she say? I got into the wrong car and fell asleep on a stranger who then drove me home safely and left me a cryptic warning. They'd think exhaustion had finally broken her brain. And even if they believed her, what would it change? He knew where she lived now. The note made that crystal clear. So she told no one. The days that followed were routine on the surface. Shifts at Gangnam Medical Center, 12 hours of controlled chaos, saving the ones she could save and mourning the ones she couldn't. Her tiny efficiency apartment with its broken elevator and paper-thin walls. Instant ramen dinners eaten standing up at her kitchen counter because sitting down felt like admitting defeat. Sleep that came hard and left her unrest. But underneath the routine, the memory followed her like a ghost. Not haunting her with fear exactly, though there was fear, a rational, healthy terror of whatever she'd stumbled into. But also curiosity, strange and persistent and impossible to ignore. Why hadn't he hurt her? Men with enough power to write warnings like that didn't show mercy without reason. The cologne on her scrubs, even after washing. The phantom sensation of that shoulder, solid and warm. The careful way she'd been carried, like she mattered, like she was something more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. You're distracted, Dr. Park Jin-woo said on the 4th day, catching her staring at nothing during their lunch break. More than usual, I mean. Everything okay? Fine, she lied, stabbing at her kimbap. Just tired. His eyes were too knowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. Park had known her since her residency, had covered her shifts when she got sick, had listened to her cry after particularly bad cases. You're always tired. This is different. You look haunted. If only he knew. The 5th day started like any other. A relatively quiet shift, only one code, a traffic accident victim they'd actually managed to save, a handful of routine emergencies. She finished her charts, changed out of her scrubs, pushed through the ER doors into Seoul's early evening humidity. The monsoon had finally broken, leaving the city sticky and exhausted in its wake. The black Mercedes S-Class was waiting at the curb. Her heart stopped. Actually stopped, or felt like it did, her vision tunneling down to that sleek predator of a car with its dark windows and chrome that caught the setting sun like a blade. The same car. She knew it in her bones, recognized it the way prey recognizes a predator's silhouette. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit expensive and perfectly tailored. His face was professional stone, but his eyes tracked her with the focus of someone trained to assess threats. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that felt wrong given the circumstances. Yoon Seossi, he said, his voice carrying across the distance between them with perfect clarity. Chairman Kong would like to speak with you. Chairman Kong. A name. The ghost finally had a name. The world tilted sideways. Chairman anything in Seoul's underworld meant power, meant danger, meant the kind of connections that made people disappear. Her mind raced through news stories, whispered rumors in the hospital about which nightclubs to avoid, which neighborhoods belonged to which organizations. Chairman Kong. She should know that name. She should run. COA. Dr. Park appeared at her elbow, his hand gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide behind his glasses. COA, do you know who that is? Don't get in that car. Whatever this is, don't. But she was already moving. Her feet carrying her forward like they belonged to someone else, someone braver or stupider than Yoon Seo-ah from Busan who'd spent her whole life being careful, being smart, staying in her lane. Every rational cell in her brain screamed at her to listen to Park, to run back into the hospital, to call security, to do anything except walk toward that car. Yet she couldn't stop. 5 days of ghosts, of questions without answers, of that phantom cologne and the memory of gentleness from hands that had written "next time you might not survive." She needed to know why. Why he'd spared her. Why he'd returned. Why her hands were steady for the first time in 5 days as she approached the Mercedes. The driver, Min Jae, she'd learn later, opened the back door. Inside, the interior smelled exactly as she remembered. Leather and sandalwood and danger. But this time, when she slid into the back seat, she was wide awake. This time, when she saw the man waiting there, dark eyes that held secrets and violence in equal measure, expensive suit that cost more than 6 months of her rent, face that was beautiful in the way sharp things are beautiful, she knew exactly whose car she was in. This time, she chose it. The door closed behind her with that same vault-like sound, sealing her in with Chairman Kong and whatever came next. The Mercedes pulled away from the hospital with the smooth silence of a machine worth more than COA would earn in 5 years. She sat rigid against the leather seat, acutely aware of the man beside her, of the space between them that felt both too vast and not nearly vast enough. Chairman Kong occupied his corner of the back seat with the stillness of someone who'd learned to conserve energy, to move only when movement served a purpose. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to shoulders that didn't need the help, and his hands rested on his knees with a casual grace that somehow made them look more dangerous. He watched her. Just watched, dark eyes tracking her face with an intensity that should have felt predatory but instead felt like being seen through a microscope, every cell examined and catalogued. The silence stretched. Not threatening exactly, but weighted with all the questions neither of them was asking. Seoul slid past the tinted windows, Gangnam's glittering towers giving way to older neighborhoods, evening traffic beginning its nightly snarl. Min Jae drove with the steady competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, who knew when to stay silent. "Are you going to kill me?" The question escaped before COA could stop it, her voice steadier than she felt. Kang's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, amusement, maybe, or surprise. "If I wanted you dead, you'd have never woken up 5 days ago." His voice was exactly as she'd imagined it during 5 days of ghost-haunted thoughts, deep, controlled, with Seoul's urban polish smoothing over something rougher underneath. "You'd have disappeared into the Han River, and no one would have asked questions the police couldn't ignore." The casual way he said it, like discussing the weather, like stating simple fact, sent ice down her spine. But underneath the ice was something else. Relief, perhaps. At least he was honest. Then why am I here? Her courage was rising now, the same reckless courage that made her run codes when other nurses backed away, that made her argue with senior doctors when she knew she was right. "You left me that note. You knew I'd spend 5 days terrified. You could have just forgotten about me." For the first time, Kang's perfect stillness cracked. He looked away, out the window at Seoul's neon bleeding into twilight. "I wanted to see if you were real." "Real? 5 days ago, you got into my car like it was yours. Fell asleep on me like I was safe." He turned back to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Do you understand how impossible that is? How many people in this city would rather die than sit where you're sitting? And you drooled on my shoulder and muttered about epinephrine doses. Despite everything, the danger, the fear, the insanity of this entire situation, COA felt heat crawl up her neck. I was exhausted. I know. Something in his voice softened, just fractionally. I saw your schedule. 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week. You make less in a month than I spend on dinner. Your apartment has a broken elevator and mold in the bathroom. Yet you work yourself to exhaustion saving people who can't pay their bills. The fact that he knew these things should have terrified her. Instead, she felt anger spark. Are you judging how I live? No. The answer was immediate, definitive. I'm trying to understand why. Why what? Why someone would choose that life. Would break themselves for strangers. Would send half their paycheck to family in Busan who, forgive me, don't seem to appreciate the sacrifice. He leaned forward slightly, genuine curiosity in his expression. I've spent my entire adult life around people who only act when there's profit. You save lives for barely minimum wage. Why? Coa stared at him, this man who commanded rooms with a look, who wrote warnings on expensive paper, whose name made Dr. Park go pale. Because someone has to. Because that 23-year-old motorcycle accident victim deserved someone fighting for him, even if I lost. Because. She swallowed hard. Because believing people are worth saving is the only thing that makes sense in a world that keeps trying to prove otherwise. Kong went very still. You actually believe that? Don't you believe in anything? The question hung between them like a blade. For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze distant, focused on something she couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. I believe in power. In protecting what's mine. I have a sister, younger, studying in London, thinks I run a legitimate business. She's the only family I have left. My father was killed when I was 23. Same age as your motorcycle patient. His own business partner put 3 bullets in his chest over a territorial dispute. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was a violent man who built an empire on fear. I inherited that empire and made it worse. He said it without pride or shame, just fact. I've killed people, Yoon Seoa. Not ordered it done, actually pulled the trigger. I own nightclubs that launder money, run protection rackets, control half of Gangnam's underground economy. I'm everything you've spent your life opposing. Then why did you carry me home? The question broke something in his careful composure. I don't know, he said again, the same answer he'd given Min Jae. I should have woken you up. Should have scared you enough that you'd check every car door twice for the rest of your life. Instead, He trailed off, shaking his head. You were gentle, Coa finished quietly. I remember that. Not the carrying, but the feeling of it. Of being held like I mattered. Their eyes met, and the air between them changed, charged with something electric and dangerous and entirely inappropriate. Kong looked away first, clearing his throat. We're here. The car had stopped at Hangang Park's riverside overlook. Beyond the windows, the Han River stretched like a ribbon of captured light, Seoul's bridges spanning it like jeweled threads. Couples walked hand in hand along the paths. Families spread picnic blankets. Normal people living normal lives. Have dinner with me, Kong said, and it wasn't quite a question. Let me apologize for frightening you. For investigating you. For dragging you into something you shouldn't be part of. Every rational cell in Coa's brain screamed warnings. This was insane. He'd just admitted to murder, to running criminal enterprises, to being exactly the kind of danger her mother had warned her about when she'd moved to Seoul. Dr. Park's pale face flashed through her mind, don't get in that car, But underneath the fear was something else, something she'd felt in his car 5 nights ago before exhaustion claimed her. The feeling of being seen. Not as Nurse Yoon who worked herself to breaking, not as the dutiful daughter sending money home, not as another face in Seoul's endless crowd. He saw Coa. The woman who believed people were worth saving even when the world proved otherwise. The one who was lonely in a city of 10 million people. And when she looked at him, really looked past the expensive suit and dangerous reputation, she saw the loneliest person she'd ever met. One dinner, she heard herself say. Then I go back to my life. You go back to yours. The smile that touched Kang's lips was slight, barely there, but it transformed his face from beautiful to devastating. The first crack in armor built over years of violence and loss. One dinner. They both knew she was lying. Both knew one dinner would never be enough. Both knew they'd already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that the nurse and the crime boss had collided in the rain and nothing would ever be quite the same. The unspoken understanding settled between them like a promise and a threat. One dinner, COR repeated, but she was already lost. The dress was navy blue, simple, bought 3 years ago for her cousin's wedding in Busan and worn exactly twice since. COR had pulled it from the back of her closet where it hung between her winter coat and nursing uniforms, the fabric still holding creases from being folded too long. It fit differently now, looser around her waist where irregular meals and endless shifts had carved away softness, tighter across shoulders built from years of lifting patience. She'd tried 4 different ways of styling her hair before giving up and letting it fall straight, applied makeup with hands more accustomed to 4 placements than eyeliner. Looking at herself in her apartment's cracked bathroom mirror, she felt like an imposter. Like a girl from Busan pretending to be someone who belonged in Chairman Kang's world. The Mercedes arrived exactly on time. Of course it did. The restaurant in Cheongdam-dong was the kind of place COA had only seen in Korean dramas, all dark wood and subtle lighting, with a door so understated she'd have walked past it without noticing. No sign. No menu posted outside. The kind of place where you either belonged or you didn't, and everyone could tell the difference. Inside, it was empty. Completely empty. Tables set with perfect precision, white linens, crystal glasses catching candlelight, but no other diners. Just staff who materialized from shadows to bow deeply as Kang entered, murmuring, "Chairman Nim," with respect that bordered on fear. He'd reserved the entire restaurant. For her. For them. "Is this normal for you?" COA asked as a server pulled out her chair with practiced grace. "Buying out restaurants?" Kang settled across from her, and even sitting he commanded the space, made the elegant room feel like it existed to frame him. "Privacy is valuable in my line of work. And I thought you might be uncomfortable with an audience." He was right, though she wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. The meal appeared in courses she couldn't name, delicate arrangements of seafood and vegetables that looked too beautiful to eat, each bite an explosion of flavors she couldn't appreciate through the nervousness making her throat tight. The wine was older than she was, poured into crystal that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Tell me something real," Kang said after they'd exhausted safe topics like the weather and Seoul's traffic. "Not the version you tell strangers. Something true." COA set down her chopsticks carefully. "My parents wanted me to marry a doctor from a good family. Have children. Live in a nice apartment in a respectable neighborhood. Instead, I work myself to exhaustion for people who can't pay, send most of my salary to support my younger brother Junho through university, and live in a place with mold and a broken elevator." She met his eyes. "They're ashamed of me. Won't say it directly, but I hear it in my mother's voice when I call. When are you going to settle down? When are you going to stop wasting your education? What do you want?" The question was so simple, so direct, it knocked the breath from her lungs. "I want to open a free clinic someday. In a neighborhood like mine, where people can't afford regular healthcare. I want to save lives without watching families choose between treatment and rent." She laughed, but it came out bitter. Impossible dream for someone drowning in student loans. Kang's expression was unreadable. "My father built his organization from nothing. Started as muscle for a loan shark, worked his way up through intelligence and brutality in equal measure. By the time I was born, he controlled half of Seoul's underground economy. He lifted his wine glass, studied the ruby liquid like it held answers. He died when I was 23. Betrayed by someone he trusted. I inherited an empire I never wanted and a war I didn't start. 11 years later, I'm 34 and trapped. Can't leave without losing everything my father built. Can't stay without becoming more of what he was. What do you want?" She threw his question back at him. For a long moment, he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want my sister to never know what I really do. I want to sleep without seeing the faces of people I've killed. He stopped, his jaw clenching. It doesn't matter what I want. We're both prisoners, Coa said softly. You to your father's legacy. Me to expectations I'll never meet. Both exhausted. Both yearning for something real. Their eyes met across the table, and the connection was palpable, two people drowning in different oceans, recognizing the same desperation in each other. Kang's phone shattered the moment. He glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor shifted, softness hardening into something cold and lethal. Excuse me. He answered in clipped Korean. This better be important. Whatever he heard made his jaw clench. Handle it, he started to say, but the restaurant's door opened. 3 men entered. Expensive suits that didn't quite hide the violence underneath, the kind of men who walked like they owned space other people only borrowed. The staff vanished like smoke. The lead man, stocky, scar bisecting his left eyebrow, smiled with too many teeth. Kong stood slowly, and Coa watched the transformation complete. The almost vulnerable man she'd been talking to disappeared, replaced by Chairman Kong, the one whose name made people go pale. He moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the intruders with casual precision. Kim Tae-sung. Kang's voice could have frozen fire. You're interrupting my dinner. Chairman Kong. The scarred man's smile widened. The Choi faction sends regards. Wanted to deliver a message personally. His eyes slid past Kong to Coa, assessing, calculating. Who's this? A new business interest. Didn't know you entertained companions at Jungsik. The implication in his tone made Coa's skin crawl. Kang's hand flexed at his side, the only outward sign of the rage she could feel radiating from him. My personal affairs are none of the Choi faction's concern. Each word was ice and promise. Deliver your message and leave. The message is simple, stay out of Seongsadong. Those warehouses aren't yours anymore. Kim Tae-sung's eyes remained on Coa. Would hate for something unfortunate to happen because of territorial misunderstandings. Especially with such delicate company around. The threat hung in the air like poison. They'd seen her. They knew she mattered. In Kang's world, that made her a weapon, a pressure point, a vulnerability to exploit. Get out. Kang's voice dropped to something subterranean, deadly calm that was more terrifying than shouting. Before I forget we're in public. Kim Tae-sung laughed, his companions joining in with the rehearsed timing of hyenas. Enjoy your dinner, Chairman Nim. We'll be seeing you. Another pointed look at Coa. Both of you. They left trailing mockery and implicit violence. The silence after their departure was suffocating. Kong stood rigid, fury and fear warring in his expression, fear for her, she realized. He pulled out his phone. Min Jae will take you home. Don't contact me again. Excuse me. Coa stood, anger flooding through shock. You don't get to make that choice for me. They've seen you now. They know you matter. Do you understand what that means? He wouldn't look at her, already moving toward the door. This was a mistake. I never should have. She grabbed his hand, stopping him mid-step. His skin was warm, his hand larger than hers, and she felt the tremor running through him. I'm not afraid of you. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. You should be afraid of them. Then teach me. She tightened her grip. Show me how to survive your world. But don't you dare decide I'm too fragile to handle it. Kong turned, and the look in his eyes was raw, longing and terror and something desperate. They'll use you against me. Let them try. Where this courage came from, she didn't know. Maybe from years of running codes, of making life-or-death decisions in seconds. Maybe from something deeper, something that recognized this man needed someone to choose him despite the danger. I walked into your car twice. You think I don't understand the risk? Coa. She kissed him, reached up and pulled him down and pressed her lips to his with all the desperate certainty of someone jumping off a cliff. His surprise lasted maybe half a second before he responded, his arms coming around her, pulling her close with a hunger that matched hers. The kiss was inevitable, dangerous, crossed every line she'd spent her life respecting. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kang's forehead rested against hers. "They'll use you against me now," he whispered. "Then we'll deal with it. Together. No one has ever," his voice cracked. "No one chooses this. Chooses me, knowing what I am. I just did." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "So what now, Chairman Kong?" His laugh was rough, disbelieving, but his arms didn't let her go. "Now we're both in trouble." Seoa tried to pretend nothing had changed. She showed up for her shifts at Gangnam Medical Center, ran the same codes, saved the same lives, ate the same terrible cafeteria kimbap. On the surface, everything was exactly as it had been before a rainy night and a wrong car had tilted her world sideways. But she noticed them now. The man reading a newspaper in the hospital cafe who'd been there for 3 hours without ordering food. The woman in business attire lingering near the ER entrance, her eyes tracking Seoa's movements with professional disinterest that was too studied to be real. Kang's security detail, keeping their distance but always present, invisible guardians she'd never asked for but couldn't refuse. It made her feel simultaneously safer and more exposed. Dr. Park cornered her in the supply room on her third shift back, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by something harder, more urgent. He closed the door behind them, arms crossed, and the disappointment in his eyes made her want to disappear. "I asked around," he said without preamble. "Chairman Kong of the Kongpa. Do you know what he is, Seoa? What he does?" "Jin Woo. He runs protection rackets. Money laundering operations. There are rumors, more than rumors, that he's personally killed rivals. People around him die, Seoa." Park's voice cracked. "I've known you since your residency. You're brilliant, compassionate, you save lives. What are you doing with someone who takes them?" The accusation stung because it was fair, because she'd asked herself the same question 100 times in the past 3 days. "He's more than his reputation. Is he? Or are you seeing what you want to see because he pays attention to you?" Park's expression softened, but his words remained sharp. "You work yourself to death for pennies. He probably spends more on a single dinner than you make in a month. That power imbalance alone should terrify you. You don't know him. Neither do you." "Not really." Park grabbed her shoulders gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I care about you. I don't want to identify your body when this goes wrong. Please, Seoa. Walk away before it's too late." She wanted to argue, to defend Kong, to explain the loneliness she'd seen in his eyes, the gentleness in how he'd carried her home. But the words died in her throat because maybe Park was right. Maybe she was being naive. Maybe. Her phone buzzed. A text from Junho, her younger brother. Asterisk Nuna, weird thing. Some men came to campus asking about you. Said they were old friends but didn't give names. They knew where I lived. Should I be worried? Asterisk. The world dropped away. Her hand started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Junho. They were targeting Junho. Her baby brother who was supposed to be safe in his university bubble, studying engineering, worrying about exams and dating, not about men asking questions for the Choi faction. "I have to go." She pushed past Park, already dialing Kang's private number with fingers that barely responded. He answered on the first ring. "Coa. My brother." Her voice came out strangled. "They went to his university. They're asking about me." Junho texted. "Where is he now?" Kang's tone shifted instantly, all business, the soft edges she'd discovered over dinner gone. She heard him moving, giving orders to someone in the background. His apartment, I think. Kang, if they hurt him. They won't. Give me the address. She recited it from memory, the student housing near Korea University where Junho shared a tiny two-room with 3 other engineering students. I'm sending protection now. Within the hour, he'll have a detail. They won't get near him. This is my fault. The words tasted like ash. He's in danger because of me. No. Kang's voice was hard as iron. He's in danger because the Choi faction are cowards who go after family when they can't touch their real target. This is on them, not you. But it felt like her fault. Every choice had consequences, and she'd chosen this, chosen him, without thinking about collateral damage. The shift blurred past in a haze of anxiety. She checked her phone compulsively between patients, waiting for updates from Junho, from Kang, from anyone. The security detail watching her seemed less comforting now, more like evidence of how far she'd fallen into a world where protection details were necessary. Her shift ended at 10 p.m. The parking garage was nearly empty, her footsteps echoing off concrete as she headed toward the employee section. The fluorescent lights flickered, they always did. Budget cuts meant maintenance happened quarterly instead of monthly, casting shadows that moved like living things. A man stepped out from behind a pillar. Seoa's heart slammed into her throat. He was average height, average build, forgettable except for the way he moved, controlled, purposeful, closing the distance between them with casual precision. Yoon Seossi. Not a question. He knew exactly who she was. She backed up, hand diving into her bag for her pepper spray, for her phone, for anything. Stay away from me. He raised his hands in mock surrender, but kept walking. Just delivering a message. Chairman Kang should be more careful with his toys. He was close enough now that she could smell cigarette smoke on his breath. The Choi faction sends regards. Terror froze her lungs. This was real. This was actually happening. Not implied threats over dinner but a man in a parking garage, alone with her, delivering warnings that felt like promises. Her fingers found her phone. She hit Kang's number, didn't wait for him to answer. Parking garage. Level B2. Now. The man's expression flickered, surprise, then calculation. He'd expected her to be alone, unprotected. He stepped back, hands still raised. Smart girl. But next time, maybe there's no time for phone calls. He disappeared between cars with practiced ease. Seoa's legs gave out. She slumped against the concrete pillar, breathing too fast, vision tunneling. First real threat. First time she truly understood what choosing Kang meant. Not romantic danger from drama scripts but actual violence, actual men who knew where she worked, when she left, who could corner her in empty parking garages. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes that felt like hours, a black Mercedes screeched into the garage with enough speed to leave rubber on concrete. Kang emerged before it fully stopped, Min-jae and 2 other men she didn't recognize following. His eyes found her immediately, scanned her for injuries, and something in his expression cracked when he saw her sitting against the pillar, shaking. He crossed to her in 3 strides, dropped to his knees beside her. Are you hurt? No. He delivered a message. She forced the words out through chattering teeth. About you being careful with your toys. Kang's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. He turned to his men. Find him. Now. Every camera, every exit. I want him in front of me within the hour. They scattered like hunting dogs released. Kang turned back to Seoa, his hands hovering near her shoulders like he was afraid she'd break if he touched her. I'm sorry. I should have had them closer. I should have. Where is he? She cut him off. The man who threatened me. Where is he? Kang's expression went cold, lethal. Being located. What will you do to him? What do you think? No apology in his voice. This was who he was, what he did. Coa watched his face transform into something carved from ice and violence, watched the careful control he maintained fracture into barely leashed rage, and understood. This was the man who'd killed rivals. Who'd inherited an empire built on fear. Who would hurt, probably kill, the man who'd threatened her. And she was going to stop him. Don't. Her voice was stronger now. Not here. Not in the hospital. Kong stared at her like she'd spoken another language. He threatened you. I know. And if you kill him here, there are cameras. Police. You'll be arrested. She grabbed his hand, felt the tremor of rage running through him. I'm protecting you from yourself. For a long moment, he didn't move. His men had the stalker. She could hear commotion by the garage entrance, voices raised in Korean too fast to follow. Kong could give the order. Could make this man disappear. Everyone in the garage knew it. But he looked at Coa, at her hand on his, at the determination in her eyes despite the fear. And something shifted. Take him, Kong said to Min Jae, his voice glacial. Make sure the Choi faction gets a clear message about the consequences of touching what's mine. But not here. The men dragged the stalker away. His protests echoed off concrete until a car door slammed, cutting them off. Kong pulled Coa to her feet, his hands gentle despite the violence still radiating from him. You need to stay away from me. This is only the beginning. They'll keep coming, keep threatening, keep using you to get to me. Then teach me. She met his eyes, refused to look away. Teach me how to survive your world. Because I'm not leaving. Coa. I won't abandon you. The certainty in her voice surprised her. You think I don't see what this is? You're trying to protect me by pushing me away. But I'm choosing to stay. So either teach me how to survive, or watch me stumble through it blind. No one had ever chosen him before. She could see it in his eyes, disbelief, wonder, fear. No one had ever picked danger over safety just to stand beside him. If you stay, he said slowly, you need to understand everything. My world, my enemies, what I've done. All of it. Then show me. His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle despite everything. This will change you. I know. She leaned into his touch. But staying away would destroy me. The nightclub was called Eclipse, and from the outside it looked like 100 other venues in Gangnam, neon signage in Hangul and English, velvet ropes, a line of 20-somethings in designer clothes waiting for entry. Bass thudded through the walls hard enough to feel in Coa's chest. Normal. Legitimate. Exactly what it was supposed to look like. Kong led her past the line, past security who bowed deeply and murmured, Chairman Nim, through doors that opened into controlled chaos. The main floor was all strobing lights and bodies moving to music that felt like a physical force. But Kong didn't stop there. He guided her through another door, down a hallway where the music became muffled, then through a third door that required a key code and fingerprint scan. The back rooms were different. Quiet, elegant, decorated like a luxury hotel suite. Men in expensive suits sat around tables, discussing things in low voices that cut off when Kong entered. Money changed hands. Documents were signed. This was where the real business happened, where Seoul's underworld conducted itself with boardroom civility. Everyone, Kong said, his hand resting at the small of Coa's back, this is Yoon Coa. She's under my protection. That means she's under yours. The weight of those words settled over the room. Protection in this world meant something absolute, inviolable. It meant anyone who touched her would answer to all of them. Min Jae stepped forward first. Up close, without the barrier of the car between them, he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30, with a scar along his jawline and eyes that had seen too much. We've met, he said with the ghost of a smile. Sort of. You drool in your sleep. Despite everything, Coa felt heat crawl up her neck. I was exhausted. You were brave. His expression turned serious. Stupid, getting into the chairman's car like that. But brave coming back. I respect that. A woman emerged from one of the side rooms, tall, striking, dressed in a fitted black suit that would have looked severe on anyone else but on her looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her eyes assessed Coa with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. Yuna, Kong introduced. My second in command. If anything happens to me, you answer to her. Yuna's handshake was firm, her expression unreadable. A nurse, she said, making it sound like a curiosity rather than a profession. Chairman Kong doesn't usually bring civilians into operations. You must be special. Or a liability, a voice said from the corner. An older man, 50s maybe, with wire-rimmed glasses and the soft hands of someone who worked with numbers instead of weapons. Mr. An, Kong said with an edge of warning. Coa, this is our accountant. Mr. An's bow was perfunctory. Forgive my bluntness, Yunus SI, but emotion is bad for business. The chairman's feelings for you make him vulnerable. Make all of us vulnerable. Then don't let me be a liability. Coa met his gaze steadily. Teach me how to be an asset instead. Yuna's lips curved into something that might have been approval. I like her. The unspoken truth settled over Coa as she watched these people interact with Kong, the deference, the loyalty, the way they moved around him like satellites around a sun. These were his family. Not blood, but something deeper. Forged in violence and trust and shared secrets that could bury them all. Loving Kong meant accepting this, accepting them, accepting that the lines between legitimate and criminal blurred into meaninglessness in rooms like these. She was still processing when chaos erupted. Men burst through the door carrying someone between them, his shirt soaked crimson, his face pale as death. Gunshot, one of them gasped. Chest. We can't take him to a hospital. Put him on the table. Kang's voice was pure command. They cleared a card table with one sweep, scattering chips and playing cards. The wounded man, barely 20, she noticed with a lurch, was laid out, bleeding through a makeshift bandage someone had pressed to his chest. Coa moved before thinking. Instinct overriding fear, training overriding the screaming voice that said this was insane. She was at the table, her hands already assessing the wound, her mind cataloging what she needed. Gunshot wound, right upper chest. Her voice came out steady, clinical. Entry wound, no exit. Bullet still in there. He's going into shock. I need sterile gloves, gauze, forceps if you have them, any antibiotics, and something to sterilize my hands. Now. They stared at her. She snapped her fingers. Now. Unless you want to watch him bleed out. Yuna moved first, barking orders. Within minutes, Coa had improvised supplies spread across the table, vodka for sterilization, a first aid kit that was better stocked than she'd expected, clean towels. Not ideal. Not even close to proper medical conditions. But it would have to work. Hold him down, she said, pulling on gloves. This is going to hurt. The next 20 minutes were pure focus. Everything else disappeared, the watching crowd, the knowledge that she was performing emergency surgery in a nightclub's back room on a criminal who couldn't go to a proper hospital. There was only the wound, the bleeding, the bullet she needed to extract before it caused more damage. Her hands were steady as they'd been for 1,000 procedures. Her voice commanded respect from men twice her size. She found the bullet lodged against a rib, extracted it with forceps that trembled only after it was out. Packed the wound, administered antibiotics, stitched with thread that wasn't medical grade but would hold. The young man's color improved, his breathing steadied. He'd live. When she finally stepped back, pulling off bloody gloves, the room was silent. Every person watched her with something like awe. This nurse who'd walked into their world and saved one of their own with nothing but skill and courage. Kang's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," the wounded man whispered in Korean. "Thank you. Rest," she told him gently. "And see a real doctor in 24 hours. I'm serious." Yuna was the first to speak. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Emergency room. You see enough gunshot wounds, you learn." Coa looked around the room. "He'll need monitoring. Infection is a risk. And I'm not joking about the doctor. I'll make sure he gets proper care," Yuna said, and the respect in her voice was genuine now. "You just saved his life." Mr. An said nothing, but his skeptical expression had softened. Min-jae nodded approval. The other men, the ones she didn't know, looked at her differently now. Not as the chairman's liability, but as someone who'd earned her place. Kang's hand found hers. "Come with me." His apartment was in a building so exclusive it didn't have a sign, just a number in understated brass. The penthouse, naturally. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering sprawl, furniture that was all clean lines and expensive minimalism. It should have felt cold, but instead it felt lonely. Like a showroom instead of a home. "You were magnificent," Kang said once they were alone, his voice rough. "Watching you work, you were brilliant. I'm a nurse." She was shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. "It's what I do." He pulled her close, and she let herself collapse against him, into the safety of his arms despite knowing that nowhere near him was truly safe. They stood like that for a long time, her bloody scrub staining his expensive shirt, neither caring. "My father died when I was 23, Kang said eventually, his voice barely above a whisper. His business partner, man he'd known for 15 years, put 3 bullets in his chest over a warehouse dispute. I was there. Watched him bleed out on the floor of his own office. Held his hand while he died." Coa tightened her arms around him. "I killed the man who did it." He said it without emotion, just fact. "And his brother. And anyone who'd been part of the conspiracy. 12 people dead within a month. I was 23 years old and I'd become exactly what my father raised me to be." "You've done terrible things," she said quietly. "I won't pretend you haven't." "Then why stay?" "Because you're trying to be better. I see that. I see the man who carried me home gently. Who protects his sister from this world. Who looked at me tonight like watching me save a life was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "You're more than the worst things you've done." The kiss was different this time, not desperate but deep, searching, like they were trying to crawl inside each other's souls. When they broke apart, Kang rested his forehead against hers. "I'll find a way out," he promised. "For you, I'll find a way out of this life." They both knew he was lying. Knew that leaving his father's empire wasn't possible, that the violence would follow them wherever they went. But in that moment, wrapped in each other, soul sparkling below them like fallen stars, the lie felt like truth. "I love you," she said, and meant it despite the impossibility. He didn't say it back, not yet, but his arms tightened around her like she was the only solid thing in his world. And maybe she was. The intelligence came through Yuna's network at 3 a.m., intercepted phone calls, a bribed informant, surveillance footage from the Seongsadong warehouses. The Choi faction was moving. Not small skirmishes anymore, but something coordinated. Something final. Kang's war room, an office above eclipse that Coa had never seen, filled with his key people within the hour. Maps of Seoul spread across tables, photographs of Choi faction leadership pinned to walls, phones ringing with constant updates. She watched him transform into the chairman completely, giving orders with brutal efficiency, planning moves and countermoves like a chess grandmaster. "You should go home," he told her during a brief lull, exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes. "This is going to get ugly." "No." Coa crossed her arms. "If I'm your weakness, make me your strength." Coa. Listen to me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I work in the ER at Gangnam Medical Center. Do you know who else ends up there? Everyone. Including Choi faction members when they get hurt. I see their faces, hear their conversations, have access to their medical records. She watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Let me help. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than doing nothing. More dangerous than being your blind spot. She grabbed his hand. I'm already a target. At least let me be useful. The argument went in circles for 20 minutes, his protective instincts versus her stubborn refusal to hide. Finally, reluctantly, he agreed. But only with conditions. Only with additional security. Only if she promised to report anything suspicious immediately. She'd won, but the victory felt hollow when she saw the fear in his eyes. 2 days later, her parents arrived in Seoul unannounced. Seoa was leaving her apartment for a morning shift when she found them waiting in the building's lobby, her mother in a conservative hanbok, her father in his one good suit. The expressions on their faces made her stomach drop. Mom, Dad. What are you doing here? Her mother held up a phone, screen showing photographs that must have been taken by someone following her. Seoa and Kong at the riverside overlook. Entering eclipse together. Her in that navy dress, him in his expensive suit, looking at each other like the rest of the world didn't exist. What have you become? Her mother's voice trembled. We sacrificed everything for your education. Worked in factories so you could be a nurse, could have a respectable life. And this is what you do? Throw yourself at a gangster. He's not, it's not like that. Not like what? Her father's voice was hard as stone. We asked around, Seoa. Chairman Kong of the Kongpa organization. A criminal. A killer. You're destroying your life for a man like that. They moved to her apartment, but the walls were too thin, the space too small for the magnitude of this conversation. Seoa made tea with shaking hands while her mother cried quietly and her father paced like a caged animal. You don't understand, Seoa tried. He's more than his reputation. He's trying to change. They never change. Her mother's voice broke. Men like that, they drag everyone down with them. Your brother called us. Said strange men were asking about you. Do you understand what you've done? You've put Junho in danger for this criminal. I love him. The words came out desperate, pleading. I know what he is. I know what he's done. But I love him anyway. Her father stopped pacing. Then choose. Your family, or this gangster who will get you killed. Choose now, Seoa. She looked at her mother's tears, her father's rigid disappointment, and felt something break inside her chest. I choose him. The silence was deafening. Her mother's sob was the only sound. When her father spoke again, his voice was hollow. Then you're no longer our daughter. They left. Just walked out of her apartment, out of her life, as simply as that. 29 years of being their daughter, erased because she'd chosen love over duty. Seoa stood in her kitchen, surrounded by 3 untouched cups of tea, and understood for the first time what it cost to love someone like Kong. She was still sitting there 2 hours later when he found her. She'd missed her shift, hadn't answered her phone. He'd come himself, bypassing security with the ease of someone who owned the building's landlord. They came, she said without looking up. My parents. They disowned me. Kang's face went white. Seoa, I'm so sorry. I never meant, this is my fault. Don't. I'll leave. He said it like a man offering his own execution. I'll disappear from your life. You can reconcile with your family, go back to. Stop. Her voice cracked like a whip. Stop trying to sacrifice yourself like you're the only one with agency here. I made my choice. I chose you. Don't insult me by pretending that wasn't real. You've lost your family because of me. Because of me. She stood, anger flooding through grief. I chose this. Me. Not you forcing me, not circumstances, not fate. I looked at what loving you would cost and I chose it anyway. So don't you dare try to take that choice away by playing martyr. You don't understand what I've done to you. Then help me understand. Her voice rose. Stop hating yourself long enough to accept that someone loves you anyway. That I see the violence, the darkness, all of it, and I still choose you. His composure shattered. Just broke apart like glass under pressure. He sank onto her cheap couch, hands covering his face, and the sound that came from him was raw and broken. Crying. Chairman Kong, who controlled half of Seoul's underworld, was crying. Seoa knelt in front of him, pulling his hands away, holding his face between her palms. We'll face this together. No more martyrdom. No more trying to protect me by leaving. We're in this now, both of us. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not. But you have me anyway. His arms came around her, crushing her against him like she was the only thing keeping him from drowning. They stayed like that until the tears stopped, until the sun moved across her apartment floor, until the world outside demanded their attention again. When Kang's phone rang, they both knew before he answered. The way his entire body tensed, the cold that crept into his expression. What? His voice was lethal calm. Seoa watched his face drain of color as he listened. Watched his jaw clench, his free hand curl into a fist. When he hung up, he looked at her with eyes that held despair and rage in equal measure. What happened? Mr. An. The name came out poisoned. He's been working for the Choi faction. Feeding them information. About the organization. About you. Her blood turned to ice. How long? Months. They know everything. Your schedule, where you live, where Junho studies. He stood, pacing like her father had, but with predatory energy instead of disappointment. They're planning to take your brother. Tonight. Han River docks. Call the police. They want me there. He turned to her, and the hopelessness in his expression broke her heart. They sent a message. My life for Junho's. If I don't show up, they kill him. The impossible choice. Everything Kong had built, his entire organization, his life, traded for her younger brother who didn't even know this world existed. And they both knew he'd do it. Would walk into certain death if it meant saving someone she loved. No. Seoa's voice was steel. We're not doing this alone. Call Yuna. Call Min-jae. Call everyone. Seoa. You said we'd face this together. She grabbed his jacket, forced him to look at her. So let's be smart. Let's use every advantage we have. But I'm not losing you, and I'm not losing Junho. For a moment, she saw the chairman she'd first met, calculating, strategic, dangerous. Then he nodded. Together. Together. But even as they started making calls, gathering his people, planning their response, Seoa felt the shadow of what was coming. The Choi faction had been 3 moves ahead. They had Junho. They had the advantage. And the docks at night were a killing ground. Everything was about to burn. The call came from Yuna at 6 p.m., her voice tight with urgency. We found Junho. He's safe. The Choi faction never had him, it was misinformation. Seoa's relief lasted exactly 3 seconds before the implications hit. Then what do they actually want? Kang's expression turned to stone. You. They want you. He was already pulling up her schedule on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. When he found it, he went absolutely still. The hospital gala. Tonight. You're required to attend. It's just a fundraiser. No. His voice was ice and certainty. It's the trap. Public venue, hundreds of witnesses, metal detectors at every entrance. They've planned this perfectly. COA checked her own phone. Messages from Dr. Park, from the hospital administrator, all confirming what Kong had found. The annual charity gala started in 2 hours. Attendance mandatory for all senior ER staff. Black tie. Cameras everywhere. Seoul's medical elite and their wealthy donors. The perfect place for a very public kidnapping. I'm not going, she said. You have to. Kong was already moving, giving orders to Min Jae on another phone. If you don't show, they'll know we figured it out. They'll adapt. At least this way, we control some variables. You're saying I should walk into their trap. I'm saying we turn their trap into ours. His eyes met hers, dark and determined. Trust me. Please. She did. God help her, she did. The gala was held in the hospital's grand auditorium, a space normally used for conferences but transformed for tonight into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, flower arrangements that cost more than COA's monthly rent. She wore the navy dress again, still the only formal option in her closet, and felt absurdly underdressed among Seoul's elite in their designer gowns and glittering jewelry. Dr. Park found her immediately. You came. After everything that's been happening, I thought. Required attendance, she said with a smile that felt like lying. Can't skip the gala. But her eyes were scanning the room constantly. The servers in their crisp white uniforms. The security at each exit. The guests who seemed just slightly off, who moved with too much purpose. Kong had told her what to look for. Had made her memorize faces from Choi faction surveillance photos. Had equipped her with a panic button disguised as a bracelet charm. Everything felt wrong. The air too heavy. The conversations too bright. At 7:47 p.m., she saw them. 6 men in server uniforms, moving through the crowd with trays of champagne. But their movements were synchronized, military. And one of them, the one near the south exit, she recognized from the parking garage. The man who delivered the Choi faction's message. Her hand found the panic button. One press. Kong would know. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red. Someone screamed. Then gunfire, 3 sharp cracks that sent the gala into chaos. People dove under tables, ran for exits that were suddenly blocked. The servers dropped their trays and pulled weapons that shouldn't have made it past security. Bribed, COA thought with crystalline clarity. They'd bribed hospital security. She pulled the fire alarm without thinking, adding to the chaos. Alarms shrieked. Sprinklers activated. Water poured down like the monsoon that had started everything, ruining expensive gowns and short-circuiting the sound system in a shower of sparks. There. One of the fake servers spotted her. The nurse. COA ran. The hospital was a maze she knew by heart, every corridor, every supply closet, every stairwell. She kicked off her heels and fled in bare feet, water-slicked floors making every step treacherous. Behind her, footsteps pounded. Ahead, she could hear more chaos. The gala attendees were sheep, panicking, getting in everyone's way. She ducked into a supply closet, grabbed what she needed. Scalpels. Syringes. A portable defibrillator. If they were going to hunt her, she'd make them regret it. The explosion of the auditorium's main doors announced Kang's arrival. She heard his voice cutting through chaos, "Find her. Now." And felt relief so intense it was painful. He'd come. Of course he'd come. She emerged from the supply closet to see Kong, Min Jae, and Yuna fighting through the corridor. No guns, they couldn't have brought them past security, but improvised weapons. A fire extinguisher in Minji's hands, swung like a club. Yuna with a broken champagne bottle, its jagged edge catching emergency lighting. Kong with nothing but his hands and the absolute certainty of violence. A Choi faction man came at Coa from a side corridor. She didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Drove the defibrillator paddles against his chest and shocked him. He went down convulsing, and she stepped over him like she'd done this 1,000 times instead of never. Coa. Kang's voice. She turned toward it. The main Choi faction lieutenant, the one with the scarred eyebrow from the restaurant, appeared between them. Bigger than Kong, armed with a knife he must have brought from outside. His smile was all teeth and promised violence. Chairman Kong. So predictable. We knew you'd come for your toy. Kang's expression went absolutely cold. Move. Or die. They crashed together with brutal efficiency. No martial arts movie choreography, just raw violence. Kong was faster, but the lieutenant was bigger, using his weight. The knife flashed. Coa saw blood, couldn't tell whose, and her heart stopped. Another Choi faction member grabbed her from behind. Arms like steel bands around her ribs, lifting her off the ground. She drove her elbow back into his solar plexus, exactly where she knew it would hurt most, and when his grip loosened, spun with a scalpel she'd palmed. Drew it across his forearm, not deep enough to kill but deep enough to make him drop her screaming. Kong was still fighting the lieutenant. They'd crashed into a wall, breaking through drywall, still grappling. The knife rose. Fell toward Kang's exposed back. Coa moved without thinking. Threw herself between them. Felt impact, pain, but not where the knife was aimed. Kong had twisted at the last second, taken the blade in his shoulder instead of his spine. His roar was animal rage. What happened next was too fast to follow. Kang's hand on the lieutenant's throat. The sickening crack of something breaking. The body crumpling. Then sirens. Real ones. Police finally arriving. Both factions melting into shadows, disappearing like smoke. Min-jae appeared, supporting Kong who was bleeding heavily from the shoulder wound. Yuna had acquired guns somewhere, don't ask how, and was providing cover. We need to move, Min-jae said. Now. Coa's nurse brain took over. He's losing too much blood. We need. The club, Kong gasped. We have supplies there. Go. The extraction was chaos. 3 of Kang's men hadn't made it out, she'd seen their bodies, would see them in nightmares. Half the gala attendees were traumatized, some injured. Police were securing the building. But somehow, they slipped through. Yuna's planning, Minji's driving, Kang's connections that ran deep enough to know which exits wouldn't be watched. In the car, Coa worked frantically to slow Kang's bleeding. Pressure on the wound. Elevation. Her dress was ruined with his blood, her hands slick with it. He was going into shock, his skin clammy, his breathing shallow. Stay with me, she commanded. That's an order, Chairman Kong. You don't get to die on me. His laugh was weak. Bossy. You have no idea. The club's back room had been transformed into a surgical suite, Yuna's work, prepared for exactly this contingency. A proper surgical table. Sterile instruments. Antibiotics. Everything Coa needed. She'd never performed major surgery alone. Had always had a full team, proper equipment, a hospital's resources. But Kong was dying, and she was all he had. Her hands were steady as she cut away his blood-soaked shirt. Steady as she prepped the wound. Steady as she extracted the blade fragments still embedded in muscle. Around her, Kang's people watched in silence, Yuna, Min-jae, others whose names she didn't know. Watching their chairman's life depend on a nurse in a ruined dress. 6 hours. The surgery took 6 hours. Coa's back screamed. Her vision blurred. But her hands never faltered. She repaired torn muscle, sealed bleeding vessels, cleaned and sutured with precision born of 1,000 emergency room cases. Dawn was breaking when she finally finished. Kang's vitals were stable. The bleeding stopped. He'd live. She collapsed into a chair beside the surgical table, still in her blood-soaked dress, and waited. Yuna brought her tea she couldn't taste. Min-jae offered to get her clean clothes she couldn't care about. She just waited. When Kang's eyes finally opened, unfocused at first, then finding her, his first words were exactly what she'd expected: "You should have run." Seoa leaned forward, took his hand in both of hers, and said with absolute certainty, "Never." His fingers tightened around hers. "I love you. I know." She was crying now, relief and exhaustion and terror finally breaking through. "I love you too. So don't ever take a knife for me again." "Can't promise that." "Try." Outside, Seoul woke to news of the hospital gala attack. Inside Eclipse's back room, the nurse and the crime boss held hands and survived another night together. 2 weeks after the gala, Seoul was still processing what had happened. 27 people injured. 3 dead, all from Kang's organization, though the news didn't report that detail. The Choi faction's leadership had been arrested in a massive police raid the following day, their warehouses and operations exposed by anonymous tips that everyone suspected came from Kang's remaining network. Mr. On's body was found in the Han River, an apparent suicide that fooled no one. The world had kept spinning. But Seoa's had stopped. Her suspension from Gangnam Medical Center was, pending investigation, hospital speak for, were terrified of the liability. Her apartment had been torn apart by police looking for evidence linking her to organized crime. They'd found nothing illegal, but everything she owned was now scattered, broken, contaminated by the investigation. Dr. Park had stopped returning her calls. Her parents' silence was deafening. She was staying at Kang's penthouse now, not because she wanted to but because she had nowhere else to go. He was recovering slowly, the shoulder wound healing but leaving him weakened in ways that terrified them both. Chairman Kang, diminished. Human. Vulnerable. They existed in a strange limbo, neither fully together nor fully separate, both haunted by what had happened and what might come next. "I have money set aside," Kang said one morning, his voice carefully neutral. They were in his living room, Seoul's skyline glittering below them like a promise or a threat. He was standing now, though his left arm still hung stiffly. "Offshore accounts. Clean money. Enough for you to start over. New city, maybe Busan near your family. New identity if you need it. You can have the life you wanted." Seoa set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Is that what you want? Me gone. I want you safe." His jaw clenched. "Everything you've lost, your job, your apartment, your family, your reputation, you lost because of me. I'm giving you a way out." "A way out." She laughed, but it came out bitter. "Like I'm in prison. Aren't you?" The question hung between them. 2 weeks of silence, of carefully not discussing the future, of existing in this strange suspended reality. Seoa felt exhausted down to her bones, not the physical exhaustion of 14-hour shifts, but something deeper. Soul-deep weariness from trauma and loss and violence she'd never imagined living through. Was love enough? Could she really build a life in the ruins of everything she'd known? Her parents had disowned her. Her career was destroyed. Her friends had abandoned her. All she had left was a man who'd taken a knife for her and was now offering her an escape from the mess loving him had created. She closed her eyes and remembered. A monsoon night. Falling asleep against a stranger's shoulder. The inexplicable peace she'd felt, like for the first time in years she wasn't alone. The feeling that someone saw her, really saw her, beneath the exhaustion and duty and expectations. "Do you love me?" she asked. Kang's expression cracked. "More than I've loved anything." More than my own life. Then we find a third option. She stood, crossing to him, taking his good hand in both of hers. Not your world. Not my old world. Our world. We build something new. Sioa, I'm a criminal. So change. The certainty in her voice surprised her. You said you'd find a way out. So do it. Not overnight, not perfectly, but start. Use your money for something legitimate. Step back from the violence. Let Yuna run the operations you can't leave immediately. Build something different. It's not that simple. Nothing about us has been simple. She pulled him closer, careful of his injured shoulder. But I'm not leaving. And I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to become who you could be. With me. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. Our world. Our world. The kiss was gentle this time, tender, full of promises they'd have to figure out how to keep. But it felt like beginning instead of ending. 6 months later, Seoul had almost forgotten about the hospital gala attack. The news cycle had moved on to newer scandals, fresher tragedies. The Choi faction was dismantled, their operations absorbed or eliminated. Chairman Kang's name appeared less frequently in police reports, more frequently in business registrations. The transition wasn't clean. Kang still limped from the shoulder injury that had damaged nerves, a permanent reminder written into his body. He'd turned over most day-to-day operations to Yuna, who ran them with ruthless efficiency while he extracted himself degree by degree. Some ventures he'd legitimized, the nightclubs now actually just nightclubs, the real estate holdings transferred to proper corporations. Others he'd simply walked away from, leaving power vacuums that weren't his problem anymore. It cost him respect from the old guard who thought he'd gone soft. Relationships with people who only valued violence. Sleep, most nights, when the guilt of what he'd done and what he'd been caught up to him. But he was trying. That had to count for something. Sioa's free clinic opened in Mapogu, 3 blocks from her old apartment building. A storefront that had been a convenience store, now transformed with Kang's money into something clean and functional. No fancy equipment, but enough. Enough to treat the neighborhood's poor, the elderly who couldn't afford regular doctors, the immigrants without insurance. She worked there 6 days a week, and for the first time since nursing school, her exhaustion felt purposeful instead of depleting. Her family was still estranged. Her mother wouldn't take her calls. Her father had made his position clear, she was dead to them. But Jun-ho, her baby brother who she protected from all of this, met her secretly for coffee once a month. Told her about university, about his girlfriend, about their parents' health. Hugged her goodbye like he was afraid she'd disappear. It was something. Not everything, but something. The PTSD came in waves. Sioa would be fine for days, then a car backfiring would send her diving for cover. The smell of gunpowder, which she'd never even noticed before the gala, made her hands shake. She had nightmares about the Choi faction lieutenant's knife, about Kang bleeding out on the surgical table, about failing to save him. Kang had his own demons. Some mornings he woke up swinging, caught in dreams of his father's death or the people he'd killed. The limp bothered him more than he admitted, this visible proof that he wasn't invincible. He saw a therapist now, something that would have been unthinkable for Chairman Kang, but was necessary for Minho who was trying to be better. They'd moved into a smaller apartment in Yongsan-gu. Nothing like Kang's penthouse or Sioa's old efficiency, but something in between. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that actually had counter space, a balcony overlooking a small park. Ordinary. Normal. Theirs. Some evenings, Sioa would come home from the clinic to find Kang cooking, badly, but earnestly, following recipe videos on his phone with the same intense focus he'd once used planning territorial expansions. They'd eat dinner at their small table, talking about her patients and his legitimate business ventures, carefully normal conversations punctuated by comfortable silences. Other nights, usually Fridays, they'd order takeout and watch television. Coa would curl against his good side, her head finding that familiar shoulder, and drift off while some drama played out on screen. He'd wake her gently when it was time for bed, and she'd mumble apologies for falling asleep on him again. "Don't apologize," he always said. "It's how we started." One Friday evening, 6 months to the day after the gala, Coa woke on the couch to find Kong watching her instead of the television. The Seoul night lights filtered through their windows, turning everything soft and golden. "What?" she asked, still half asleep. "I was just thinking," he said quietly, his hand gentle in her hair, "about the wrong car. The right mistake. How getting lost led me exactly where I needed to be." Poetic for a former crime boss. Reformed crime boss. "I'm practically legitimate now." She laughed, pressing closer to him. Outside, Seoul hummed with its endless energy, 10 million people living their lives, most of them never knowing about the nurse and the gangster who'd found each other in a monsoon. Inside their small apartment, they'd built something impossible. Not perfect. Not without cost. But real. "I love you," Coa said, the words as true as they'd been the first time. "I love you too," Kong replied, and meant it more than anything he'd ever said. The television played on, forgotten. The city sparkled below. And two people who'd collided in violence and rain held each other in the quiet peace they'd fought so hard to create. Their world. Exactly as promised. Exactly as it should be. If you made it to the end, you're exactly the kind of viewer we create these stories for, someone who appreciates moral complexity and characters who feel real. Don't let this be the last one you watch. Hit subscribe and join a community that loves stories where the answers aren't easy and the choices matter. See you in the next one.